Chapter 10. Nico is in the city. Messengers rode there to find him while the workroom was closed for its nightly cleaning. Briar, Triss, and Rosethorn returned to discipline. Crane came too. He and Rosethorn were involved in a long debate, trying to create a new course of action. They had talked as they scrubbed, shouting to be heard in the washroom. They continued all the way to discipline, squinting in the moonlight to read their notes, and debating while nearly everyone else had supper and went to bed. The dawn bell woke the sleepers. As they emerged from their rooms, they discovered that Nico had come. He sat with Crane and Rosethorn, who appeared not to have gone to bed at all. "Triss," Nico said, "eat breakfast quickly, please. We're riding to Summersea." One moment, Crane looked as if he'd been caught by surprise. "Why her? Her vision skills aren't as strong as yours." "Thanks ever so," Triss mumbled, pouring tea for herself. "I can make far better use of her," persisted Crane. "There is work to do as we await your results." "You cannot make better use of her," Nico said sharply, dark eyes glittering. "I will have to do a past visualization working at some point. For it, I require her strength and stubbornness. An extra pair of eyes will not come amiss, nor her ability to control water." "She is a clear and accurate note-taker," protested Crane. "She thinks about the notes she is given. I made infinitely more progress yesterday with her and Rosethorn and the boy than I had until then." Rosethorn flapped a hand as if she fanned herself. "Spare me my blushes," she murmured. Briar snorted. "I do not begrudge the acknowledgment of credit where it is due," replied Crane loftily. "We have a good team. Breaking it up now is most ill-advised." "Find another scribe," Nico snapped. "I'll have the Duke send his if necessary." "Is this what it'll be like when I'm older and boys are fighting for the chance to kiss my hand?" Triss murmured to Sandry. The noble girl giggled. "I do not want a ducal scribe. I want this girl. May I remind you, I will not go to the sewers without her," Nico barked. Everyone stared at him. Triss turned white. "Sewers?" she shrieked. "The disease spreads as the water level in the sewers rises and the damaged pipes leak into wells. It's plain the two are connected," Nico said. "If we are to go there without drowning, I need Triss. If I am to have power to work the spells that reveal the past, and to follow the trail to whatever mage concocted this horror, I will need Triss. No one else will do." "Not the sewers," whispered the redhead, trembling. "They're dirty." "I know," replied Nico, his voice sharp. For a long moment no one said a word. Finally Crane sighed. "May she return to me when you are done?" "I don't want to go," complained Triss. "Can't I stay with Crane and Rosethorn?" "We must," Nico retorted. "Eat your breakfast." "I'm not hungry." "Then change into old clothes. We need to do this now." Triss walked to the stairs, her feet dragging. Sandry followed her friend upstairs. "It'll be all right," those seated below heard her say. "I hope so," murmured Nico, rubbing his temples. Just after Triss and Nico left, Frostpine arrived at discipline. "More work for us," he told Daja as she ate breakfast. "Protective talismans for the Duke's soldiers, to keep a rain of chamber pots and rocks from banging them on the head in the East District. I'd hoped they'd forgotten I can do such things, but someone apparently remembered." Crane raised an eyebrow. How can you object to the protection of those who keep the Duke's peace?" Frostpine sat next to Daja, plucking morsels from a muffin and popping them into his mouth. "A proper fear of such things keeps soldiers polite," he observed. "Otherwise they might be tempted to push common folk around. Orders to enter people's homes uninvited are sore temptation for peacekeepers, I've found." Have you any respect for proper order?" asked Crane. "Depends on whose idea of order that is," said Frostpine. "Daja, are you about done?" She nodded, eating quickly. Crane shook his head. "Rosethorn? Briar? We should go." As the others left, Sandry lay her head on the table. She was one solid ache, head to toe. A cool hand rested on her forehead. Blearily she looked up at Lark. "I'm just tired," she said. "I'm not sick." "We're both tired," replied Lark. "I really hate to do this, but we've been at it for days. I think we have to rest. No work, just rest." "But Crane needs masks and gloves," argued Sandry. The idea of a day without pouring her magic into a slush of herbs, oils, and powders made her giddy. He's got enough for 2 days, Lark said firmly. We really must stop for a while. Go back to bed, dear one. I'm doing the same. The dishes can wait until we get up. Crane, Rosethorn, and Briar had just reached the spiral road when Rosethorn halted, staring at the north gate. A covered wagon like that which had taken her, Flick, and Briar to Erda's house rolled through. It was driven by a masked and gloved soldier of the Duke's guard. The red spot that meant she was free of the blue pox was vivid on her forehead. When the wagon drew near, Rosethorn motioned for the driver to stop. Are the city hospitals full that you bring the sick here? She asked. The driver shook her head. They're near full, but the Duke's putting up 2 more. One on Market Square and one on Fuller's Circle. These are temple folk with the blue pox. They're to be nursed here. Honored Moonstream's order. Temple folk? Cried Rosethorn. Who? Demanded Crane, grabbing the bridle of the horse closest to him. Do you know the names? Novices Farah, Olachi, Kazim, Alasha, and Nanjo, the driver recited tiredly. Dedicates Egret, Tree Frog, Henna, White Lake, if I may. Crane released the horses, and the wagon rolled on. Rosethorn was shaken and pale. Briar felt as if he'd been dropped down a hole. Henna was fine when she left to look after the arsenal set up, he whispered. Just fine. Rosethorn drew the God circle on her chest and closed her eyes to pray. Crane did the same. Briar waited them out as patiently as he could manage. If you give your life to a temple, he supposed, you believe that prayer worked. He knew better. Can we get to it? He asked when they looked up again. You know there's things we can do without knowing just how this magic turned into the blue pox. He's right, said Rosethorn grimly. Let's get to it. That's the only way we can help them now. Careful, said Nico. One more. You're almost down. And oh, how pleased I am to hear that, muttered Triss. Can we get on with it? Nico demanded. Triss was feeling for the next rung on the ladder with one foot. Like him, she wore thigh-high boots, oilcloth breeches and robe, an oilcloth mask, cap, and gloves. Like the other workers in Crane's greenhouse, she also sported a large red dot in the middle of her forehead as a sign she was uninfected with the blue pox. Nico's red dot, she had noticed, was on the back of one hand. He never would have consented to an unsightly red mark anywhere on his face. They had entered the system near Flick's den, taking the path that Alleypup had used to bring Rosethorn down. Nico had chosen to start where the first case of blue pox had appeared, hoping to trace its path back to its origin. This time, when Triss put down a foot, there was a small splash, and the feel of a hard, flat surface. Wincing, she put her other foot down. Another splat. She released the ladder and turned to scowl at Nico. Light bloomed around him to reveal a ledge 4 feet across, spotted with dark puddles. The canal's waters ran 1 inch below the ledge. Triss saw lumps carried along by the swift-moving tide, and rats that ran squeaking down the ledges, and cringed. The stench flooded through her nose, making her stomach roll. Trembling, she breathed with her mouth open, trying to smell only the oils and the treated cloth of her mask. This way, Rosethorn said. Nico towed her along until they reached Flick's den. Scavengers had been there already, taking the lamps taking the lamps and whatever else looked to be useful or interesting. Even the bed of rags had been picked over. Nico removed a glove to rummage in the sack he carried on one shoulder. He produced a small stone jar and opened it. Take off your spectacles, he ordered Triss. Remember the vision-enhancing ointment we made earlier this year? Gum, mastic, cinnamon bark, and oil, at a silver crescent the ounce, no less. Nico sighed impatiently. Triss glared at him and continued. Heliotrope, saffron, and cloves, lavender. Very good, Nico said. Close your eyes. She felt something cool dotted first on one eyelid, then the other. Wouldn't it be better to put on my specs, the same as your other vision spell? Nico sniffed. That spell wore off a week after I placed it on you. Triss donned her spectacles. You never told me. It slipped my mind, he replied as he put the balm on his own eyelids, then closed the jar. There's an advantage to instructing young mages. A suggestion counts for so much with you four. Now, what do you see? Her eyelids tingled. A gold veil dropped over her sight, then one that shimmered and caught on objects, then pulled free. It stuck only in a wash through the sewer and on a line of footprints that turned into Flick's den. "There's a gold tint in the water," she said, watching it. "It comes from upstream, and it's in the footprints, too. The tint is throughout the city's water. It is the footprints we must follow." Nico walked down the trail. Triss resettled her spectacles on her masked nose. They didn't fit properly with the cloth in the way, and set out after him. At first they walked in silence, intent on the trail. For some time the prints showed clear through even a slight amount of water. By the time Triss realized that either the ledge was sloping or the water was rising, she was ankle deep. "Oh no!" she cried. "Nico, stop!" "What's the matter?" he demanded. "We're walking in it, and it's getting deeper. You don't need me for this. Please let me go home, please." Nico faced her. "You see better than I do, and this is disgusting." Triss knew she was whining and was ashamed, but the horror of soggy lumps that struck her legs in the dark made her dizzy. Never in her life had she wanted to be gone from a place so badly as now. "Stop acting like a child," Nico snapped. "This job needs both of us, as I explained that to you. Complaining about how dreadful it is only makes things worse, and I don't need them to be worse. I didn't ask you to come here lightly, and I would really, really appreciate it if you could just hold your tongue." He caught his breath and stood still for a moment, eyes closed. After a moment he said, "I hate this too, understand?" Triss stared at him. Nico was sweating. It was damp and cold here, but she saw drops collect on his forehead. When she tentatively rested a hand on his arm, she could feel him trembling. She had been so busy worrying about herself that she had forgotten how finicky he was. He tended his clothing with minute zeal, inspected tableware in strange eating shops for dirt that may have escaped the lazy washing, and aired out his bedding the moment he reached a new inn. She looked at the water rolling down the tunnel toward them and thrust it aside with her power to bear the ledge. Holding it off to their right, Triss said quietly, "See? Everything's fine. You should have reminded me to get the water out of the way. I'd have done it. Now we can see the footprints better." She patted her teacher. "We all right. Come on." Wishing they had slept more, Briar followed Crane and Rosethorn into the big workroom. "If I may have your attention," Crane said. Everyone put down their work and looked at him. "There is a magical element to the blue pox," he announced. Someone gasped. Two workers murmured to each other. "May I have silence?" Crane asked, a bit too patient. He got it instantly. "Its components have yet to be determined. We hope to know by day's end what precisely we are dealing with. Should that be the case, I believe we shall begin to make progress." The workers nodded their agreement. Stick with Crane long enough, Briar thought, and you forget that all these folks must be pretty smart to get sent here, with so much at stake. He treats them like silly bleeders, but they aren't. In the meantime, we must start again, with those procedures used when we know that magic is present. Additives must be prepared. Osprey knows which of the lists to use. Rosethorn and I should review the trays that were experimented upon yesterday. Then, unless we, got lucky, a soft chuckle greeted Crane's word. "He pronounces it like he'd never said got lucky in his life, but he's trying to sound like one of us," Briar thought, amused. "If he ain't careful, he'll break a tooth that way." The dedicate cleared his throat. "Then, unless we stumble on something useful purely by accident, those trays must be emptied and cleaned thoroughly and quickly." Crane shrugged. "I regret to say that since we proceeded quite well yesterday, there are a great many trays to be cleaned." A few workers groaned. Rosethorn raised a hand for quiet. "I know this looks like a setback," she said. "The truth is, it's the best news we've had in a while. At last we know something. All of us have worked with magic enough to know it jumps funny sometimes. But we also know ways to detect what magic has shaped and unravel the spell. No long faces or complaints. We've finally got a direction we can follow." "Enough loitering," said Crane. "To work, all of you." To Rosethorn he added, "I will join you in a moment. I need to look around." Rosethorn nodded and headed for the inner workroom at her usual brisk stride. A man lifting a tray with blue pox essence turned from his counter just as Rosethorn passed and clipped her with the heavy tray. It tilted and began to slide from his grip. Instinctively, Rosethorn grabbed it as its yellow fluid ran out from under the glass top to drip on her gloves and arm. "Stupid bleeder!" Briar snarled. He yanked Rosethorn away, sliding a hand underneath the tray to raise it until it was level. "Shuffle-witted, festering—" "Stop that," Rosethorn ordered, stripping off her gloves. "Take off your gloves." "Rosethorn, he—" A lordly voice cut him off. "You! Out!" Crane ordered. "Immediately!" The worker said, "I'm sorry, I'm so—" He put the tray on the counter and fled the washroom. "Let the gloves fall. We'll clean them up," a friendly voice said in Briar's ear. It was Osprey holding 2 fresh pairs. "Dedicate Rosethorn?" "No harm done," claimed Rosethorn as she took the new gloves. Her face was pale. "It was scary, that's all. Briar, come put that anger to some use." Briar followed her to the inner workroom, pulling on his new gloves. Watching Rosethorn go to her counter, he suddenly felt weak with fright. She had said there was no harm done, hadn't she? It must be true. She wouldn't let the tiniest drip of pox run between sleeve and glove, where it might touch her skin. Never. Besides, the spot on her forehead was still crimson. She didn't have the disease. Or would it change color only when her body lost the fight to keep the pox from taking over? He couldn't work like this. Steadying himself against his counter, Briar closed his eyes and practiced meditation breathing. He wanted to stop shaking before he even tried to handle his trays. Nico and Triss halted where a pair of tunnels intersected. Triss felt the force of the water, thigh-deep now, heavy on her barrier. She poured more strength into it, burying the ledge on which they stood, and its counterpart across the intersection. With the gold shimmer in the water itself removed, they could see where the footprints continued, after a jump from ledge to ledge. Nico sighed. "I hope it's not too slippery over there." He braced himself, then leaped across the canal, landing on the far side where the footprints resumed. Triss had to back up a few steps to get the speed to clear the canal. "We were lucky at Winding Circle, I guess," Triss said grimly as they picked up the trail again. "All our water comes from wells on the other side of Wehan Ridge. None of this leaks through the stone of the ridge." They passed more intersections and entered smaller tunnels, where they had no ledge to walk on. Triss shoved the sluggish liquid mess to either side, fiercely determined to avoid contact with it for as long as she could manage. She had to pity Nico, and here he was forced to walk with a stoop, trying valiantly to keep his head from touching the slime on the roof overhead. Suddenly the trail ended in a broad, drippy blotch in the center of a tunnel and along a curved wall. Nico and Triss looked up. Immediately above that gold blotch was a barred rectangle of light, a grating. They could hear the rattle of wheels on cobblestones, and the distant clock striking the half-hour. They had passed ladders to the street all during their expedition. There was one 5 yards ahead with a sign next to it that said, "Lucky Street and Shortshank Way." Nico climbed up, opened the exit, and looked around, then sank back down a run. "Stand back," he ordered Triss. Confused, she did as she was told. Nico stripped off his heavy outer garments, dropping them into the sewer. Only his masks, gloves, and street clothes remained. He then boosted himself up onto the street. "You do the same," he ordered, his voice a haunting drift from the light overhead. "Wait until you're almost out." "Oh, joy," she muttered, panting as she struggled to climb the ladder. She tried not to remember that her 3 housemates would have clambered up like monkeys. When Triss emerged, blinking into the light, Nico stopped her. He'd removed his gloves and tossed them into the sewer. Now he pulled fresh ones from his satchel, giving a pair to Triss. As he placed the cover on the sewer hole, she looked around. They were not in the best part of town. Houses were jammed together, cobbles broken or missing in the street. A view of a towering wall between her and the sun told her they were in the East District, near the wall that separated the poorest part of Summersea from the mire. Bodies lay on either side of the narrow rising way, many attended by rats. What faces she saw were covered with blue spots. Far down Lucky Street she heard a clanking sound, metal-shod wheels on stone, a wide, deep-bedded dray making its slow way uphill toward her. Workers in gloves, robes, and masks loaded the dead into it. Those few who walked the hilly streets abroad were veiled or masked and moved with quick, scuttling gait, not unlike those of the rats. If they were puzzled at the emergence of a man and a chubby girl from the sewer, they kept it to themselves. Blue circles were painted on a number of doors to mark where the disease had struck. Fires burned on the corners. Homeless animals, their owners dead, roamed everywhere, digging through garbage in the hope of finding a meal. A bony hand rested on her shoulder. "You can't think of that," Nico said. Of course he'd seen her eyes fill at the sight of the starving creatures. "We have to track down the disease. Time to renew the balm." He fished up the jar, and, taking out a glove, dotted Triss's eyelids and his own. "Don't put your spectacles on just yet. Since we now trace not the magic as it became the plague, but the magic alone." He drew a glass vial from his satchel and opened it. As Nico touched the bottle's damp stopper to her eyelids and to the center of her forehead above the diagnosis oil, Triss's long nose twitched. New scents, heavy, unpleasant, musty, poured into that sensitive organ. She was about to inquire when Nico said quickly, "You won't learn what goes into this one for a couple of years. Some of the ingredients are poisonous. Don't even bother to ask. You can put your spectacles on." She blinked as vapors from the new liquid made her eyes sting. When Nico anointed his lids, she saw them blaze with her changed vision. She looked around. Scraps of magic glinted in corners and on doors and windowsills, the remnants of luck and prosperity charms, love potions, and other small workings. A thin blue-white cord stretched from a nearby sewer grating up to the street. Nico beckoned her, and they followed the blue-white cord to a tall, ramshackle house nearby. The door, a blue circle painted around the knocker, was half off its hinges, which made it easy for Triss and Nico to enter. They stood in the dark and narrow hall, ankle-deep in trash, facing a rickety staircase. All the doors on this story were as useless as the front door. Rats and insects fled into empty rooms, trying to escape the light that now shone bright around Nico. The blue-white cord led them up 3 flights of stairs. Triss guessed that this place had rented out rooms. It seemed that now most, if not all, of the building had been abandoned in the wake of the blue pox. The staircase ended in a garret. The looters had apparently ignored this level. Maybe they didn't like the stairs either, thought Triss as she fought to catch her breath. There were only 2 apartments. The cord vanished through the closed door on one. Nico grabbed hard, then tried the knob, only to find it locked. He sighed. "We should have brought a guard with us," he told Triss. "Now I have to find one. Why are you smiling at me?" Triss drew a small rolled-up cloth from her pocket. "Briar," she called through her magical bond. "I need some advice." Briar was about to pick up a new tray. Now he stepped away from the stack and turned his attention to his friend. "You came to the right person," he said with approval, inspecting the locked door through her eyes. "Smart thinking to bring your picks." That winter, in exchange for lessons in reading classic Kerchali, he had begun to teach her the art of lock-picking. "Which pick do you need to start?" "The long, straight one," she replied, a bit unsure. "Good. Now get close." Triss knelt before the lock and let Briar help her through the rough spots, as Nico watched, bemused. She only needed 2 picks before the lock gave and the door opened. A wave of rot stench surged from the room inside. "Someone died here," Nico remarked. "If you hadn't told me, I might never have known." Triss's sarcasm was nearly lost in the croaking of her voice as she swallowed a mouthful of bile. "You don't need me for this," Briar told her. "Good hunting." Once inside, they had to take a moment to blink their vision clear. Streps, sparkles, and bolts of magic shone everywhere. Half of the large room was a mage's workplace, with a small herb garden in the window, bottles and boxes of ingredients perched on the shelves that lined one wall, and a counter littered with jars, mortars, crystals of all shapes, and boxes of candles and ribbons. Another wall held 20 or so books. A meager hearth served for cooking as well as heat, and the pots and pans that hung from the hooks around it had seen better days. A wooden trunk also served as a table. There was a footstool and 3 chairs, all in need of patching. A tiny bedchamber opened off that room. Nico looked in and closed the door. "Our mage is dead," he said grimly. "Maybe that's best. Once her role in this was discovered, I think no power on earth could have kept her safe. People would have wanted vengeance." "What if the past viewing spell doesn't help us find out what we need to know?" Triss asked, worried. "Somewhere in here is her journal or workbook. The past viewing spell ought to show us where it is, and in turn it will tell us what she did." Nico sighed. "Are you ready to help me?" Triss nodded. They had done this kind of spell once before, to find out why the Bit Island watchtower had exploded. Remembering how they had worked it, she threw a rope of power to Nico, letting him draw on her strength as well as his own. With her improved magical vision, she saw the power that jumped from his fingertips as a series of lightning bright threads. The threads wove themselves into a circle around Nico and Triss, then spread to enclose them in a globe of cobwebs that blazed like the sun. Trish shut her eyes, hoping to blot out the too bright image, only to find the magic was still visible, though not the room. Sighing, she opened her eyes in time to see Nico make 2 cuts, one to each palm. He let the blood drip. It entered the spell webs and raced through them, making them vanish. Now they saw the ghostly image of a short, dark-haired woman at the counter. From each of 5 bottles, she dropped liquid onto 5 pieces of... That looks like bacon, she muttered. Nico squinted for a better look. It is bacon. The woman made a note in a journal, watching the raw meat intently. One strip turned green and fell apart. One crinkled and turned yellow. A third liquefied. The remaining 2 turned black as coal, as if they had been cooked for much too long. From the way she reacted, the dark-haired woman was furious. She flipped to an earlier page in her journal and crossed out what looked like recipes with the angry slashes of her pen. She tugged her hair, hit the counter, and burst into tears. At last she stoppered the glass vials and put them in a covered basket. Something then made her pause. She drew a purse through an opening in her skirt and upended it into her palm. A few copper coins spilled out. She stared at them, lips moving. Counting, Triss guessed. No, whispered Nico, you don't stop and think. There are reasons why the law says magical things must be disposed of at Winding Circle. The woman counted her money again, then stared at her basket. Opening it, she removed the vials and emptied them into a wooden bowl. She closed the journal, tied it with a ribbon that glowed with magical symbols around it, and reached into the shelves in front of her, groping. The shelves swung open to reveal a hidden compartment. She set the journal there and closed it. Bowl in hand, the mage walked through the tryst, opened a ghost door, and passed through the real one, out of their sights. Stupid, whispered Nico, as passionately angry as Triss had ever seen him. He stalked over to the shelves and reached under one, searching for the catch to the hidden compartment. Stupid, stupid, stupid! She just got rid of a potion that didn't work, protested Triss. When his search proved fruitless, she boosted herself onto the counter and thrust her smaller hand behind the bottles. She was interested to see that they were glued in place, never meant for use in the dead mage's work. Finding the catch, she tugged, and the shelf door swung open. She dropped to the floor as Nico removed the journal. She dumped 5 magically enhanced fluids that had not been properly neutralized, Nico rapped back, with no thought of how they might interact with anything else. The fee charged to handle these things is small. Gods of light and knowledge, save me from coin-pinching lackwits. She was that tight with the copper. Triss and Nico turned. A bleary-eyed old woman leaned against the door of the other garret room outside. Mind, she had to watch her money. Her work wasn't very good. Sly glee ran over the woman's puffy face. Stands to reason, don't it? If she was any good, she wouldn't have lived here with the rest of us poor folks. If you will excuse us, Nico said stiffly, holding on to the dead mage's journal. We have no time to waste. Triss ran down the stairs at a fast trot. Nico came after her. A voice drifted eerily down the stairwell. Does this mean that curse on them that breaks into her place is gone?